Well, I was really lucky. My first drum teacher when I was 11 years old in Oklahoma City was a man named Alan Abel. And he just, I was just so lucky that he happened to be the principal percussionist in the Oklahoma City Symphony when I was starting out, and my band director connected me with him and I started taking lessons. And he, even at that time, he was in his, mid-20s, I guess at the time, he was a consummate teacher. He played everything with me. So on snare drum, we each had a practice pad, and he played everything, rudiments, exercises, solos, with me all the time. So I had a template to follow. And then in music school, it was Dan Hinger was my teacher at Curtis Institute of Music. And that's where I really learned about playing timpani. And it's where I really learned about sound. And it's where I really learned about phrasing. So those were the main Western music influences. Well, I can tell you who I've learned the most from, and it's my colleagues in Nexus. And I tell my students this now, and I was told this when I was a student. My Hinger, for sure, told me, you got to get out there and play with some people. You spend all these hours in the practice room, but you got to get out and play with people, and play with the best people you can. And I was lucky to kind of stumble into the guys in Nexus, who are all consummate musicians. So that was my next step in the education of a young drummer. School is a good place to develop as much control as possible. But once you have that control, you have to develop it into something musical. And you've got to play with good people, you've got to relate those ideas to the musical atmosphere around you. And Nexus really was key in that. So I can say without equivocation the guys in Nexus. But I can also say the Steve Reich Ensemble was another thing. And some of those people were the same. Obviously, Bob Becker was in that group from an early age. And Jim Price, very wonderful percussionist who studied at Eastman with Bill Street. Another, if you want somebody who could play what I would call the perfect upstroke, it would be Jim Price. It was just fluid, floating. Every move and every sound he made was musical. So just watching people like that play and playing with them was really wonderful. Well, I guess it says I've been around a long time. And at the University of Toronto, a lot of people have come through there, a lot of great players. It's been my experience that I never know what ways I influence students. A lot of times somebody will come up to me years after they've studied with me and said, I remember our conversation about such and such, and I don't remember the conversation, but it was important for them. So it's hard to know exactly what kind of influence one has on another person, I guess in any regard, but particularly in music lessons. But I think I've been lucky to be in a place where really talented or potentially talented percussionists come to study. Well, Beverly Johnson is a good example. She came in, and with someone like that, you just you don't really teach them. You kind of guide them a little bit, and their natural talent comes to the surface. I think in the last number of years, the focus has been a little bit more toward rhythm. And even though obviously percussion instruments aren't the only ones capable of producing rhythm, it seems to come to us a lot of the times to be the interpreters or the people who seem to have a handle on rhythm, maybe more than some other people. And I think it's only probably because in some of the instruments, snare drum for example, that's kind of what we have to deal with, and we get focused on it. But for me, this interest really took off when I started performing with Steve Reich and started studying non-Western music at Wesleyan University, and discovered kinds of music that I really did not even know existed. West African drumming, South Indian drumming or music, North Indian music, gamelan. I was studying Javanese gamelan. And those were only the ones I was studying. There were other ones around. Paul Berliner was studying mbira. Ralph Samuelson was studying shakuhachi, which has, Japanese music. There's a whole other area of rhythm that's fascinating. So all these it all sort of happened around the same time for me, and stimulated my interest, in percussion, but how rhythm can be applied to percussion in particular. At one point, I realized that I made mistakes in every performance I did. And I made a conscious decision, to learn from the mistakes. And it sounds silly, but I wanted to remember the mistakes I made and figure out how not to do that again. And with the kind of, idea that I might play a perfect concert sometime with no mistakes. I'm not sure that ever has happened, but I think it's important to figure out what you're doing in a performance and what you did, good and bad. If it's good, how to maintain that, and if there was something that went wrong, what it is that you can correct. And I think I've told a lot of students, especially when you're in developmental stages, play everything you can, every kind of music at every level, and at the end of the rehearsal or concert, say, what did I learn from this rehearsal or this concert? And then you just build this whole, mound of good things to draw on. So I don't think I can answer directly your initial question, but there's always a quest for that perfect performance in a certain kind of way. It's really interesting to see them develop. I'm really happy to see so many percussion groups making a go of it as a full-time professional ensemble, or pretty much full-time ensemble. I've worked with So Percussion, of course, Torque, great players, Third Coast Percussion, and a whole bunch of other, a lot of younger groups. I think they all go through a little bit of the same thing Nexus did, although theirs is a little bit more consciously driven than Nexus's was. Nexus, we were so lucky that we had no plan in Nexus. It just happened. The friendship of the people, the way we met, just happened, and the whole thing starting with improvisation just because we had instruments, or John Wire was collecting things and invited everybody to his living room to play, and we decided, well, put this on stage and do it. And then, you know, one day Bob Becker starts playing a ragtime tune in the middle of an improvisation. We figured, well, that's kind of interesting, and the audience, good reaction, so why don't we do that? And Bob and Bill got interested in that and discovered John Cage and, of course, Steve Reich and African. All these things just happened. It wasn't, we didn't sit down and say, well, if we do this and this and this, we can put a program together and we can be this kind of ensemble. So we were really lucky that way, and still are. And Nexus is still evolving and really interesting in different ways all the time. But I think with other groups, they have to think about that a little bit more. So they don't want to be another Nexus, which is healthy. But they have to decide what they're going to do. Are they going to play kind of the European Xenakis, Stockhausen, you know, kind of thing, like some of the European groups have done? Are they going to, you know, compose themselves? Are they going to commission composers? Are they going to, what are they going to, are they actually going to do some world music? Or, and from what I've heard, So Percussion actually, when they started out, made decisions about what they were not going to do, which was they weren't going to play hand drums, or they weren't going to do certain kinds of world music. But of course, that all changed as they got into different repertoire. The first thing I think of in response to that is the advantages we have. And one of them is camaraderie. I think percussionists are very lucky that for the most part it's a team sport. And we work together, we get used to working together. We have percussion studios that fight over practice time or instrument usage, and, but in a good way, and we distribute parts in band and orchestra. All these ways of conflict and resolve that happen with a family, for example, happen in a percussion group. The importance of percussionists is rising to the fore. As Alan Kozin, you probably know this quote from Alan Kozin, was a former critic for the New York Times. He was talking about some percussion performance, and he said, when you think about it, percussion is the new violins. And they're really assuming that mantle of kind of leadership of the ensemble, and Steve Reich's ensemble is a perfect example. Steve Reich's music, the way it's interpreted, is really based on percussionists' approach to playing. And everybody else has to figure out what that is and how they can play with that same sense of feel and time on their instrument. Completely the opposite of when we're playing in a symphony orchestra and try to adapt to the string or whatever feel, which is, you know, that's fine. I love doing that too, but the world is changing in our favor. So whatever disadvantages there might be, schlepping instruments, for example, are overshadowed by all the advantages, I think.